Good morning. I was told y'all wouldn't talk back. Somebody didn't tell me the truth. We're not getting off to a good start here. It's good to be here this morning. We are going to be in Matthew chapter 5. If you have a Bible, I think it'd be great if you would turn there with me so you can make sure I'm telling the truth and that you can understand all that I'm saying, because apparently I talk fast and I have a bit of an accent. So if you have a Bible, Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to see where we go from there. One of my favorite passages in the Bible, and if you hear me preach for long, I think I'll say that about almost every passage I preach from, is the Sermon on the Mount. I think it's important to all of us as believers and as disciples, because in the Sermon on the Mount in particular, Jesus kind of lays out what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be a follower. Because if we look back in Matthew chapter 4, as Jesus is beginning his ministry, we see very specifically in Matthew chapter 4, as he's walking alone by the sea, he turns to the disciples, as before they're called disciples, and he just starts talking to them. He says, "Follow me, and I will make you disciples." Right? That's what he does over and over again. He just says, "Follow me." And then the response was immediately they left their nets and they followed him. And then again he says, "Follow me," and he called them and they followed. And he continues going on and on and on. The message that he begins proclaiming is the message of the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom. But what is that, and how is that defined, and how do we understand that, and how do we grasp that? As we get into Matthew chapter 5, we see that Jesus is turning, and he's looking, and he notices this great crowd is there, and so he ascends up this mount, or this hill, or however we want to look at it, as we look at Matthew and Mark and the different gospel accounts. And he sits there and he turns and he looks at them and he gives this speech, this sermon, this series of talks, and he kind of lays out what it means for us to be a follower of him. And so there's kind of not any gray area there. We can't really kind of write our own prescription. We don't get to choose our own path and what it means to be a disciple. We don't get to choose our own path and what it means to follow Jesus. This isn't back in when I was growing up and I was a kid, they had the books that I thought were kind of ridiculous. Or, you turn to page 12 and it's like, if you want to choose this ending, you turn to page 60. Or if you want to choose this ending, turn to... What's that all about? Because then you're like, well, I want to know what happens in this story. So then you end up reading both. But in the following of Jesus, he says, this is exactly what it means to be a disciple. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is what it means to be a follower of me. And so this morning as we dive in, we're going to pick up and begin in verse 1, but specifically focus on verses 13 to 16. And he says, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain and he sat down, and his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And in verse 13 he says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet." He says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So when we come to this specific passage, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And he's saying, this is your life. If you are a follower of me, if you have been redeemed, this is not perhaps how you should be living. This is how you are to live. This is not an idea. This is not how maybe you should live your life this way. This is a prescribed way of life, right? This isn't a, if you choose to live this way. Jesus is saying, if you are a follower of mine, you will live this way, right? This is an imperative here in this passage. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And it's a hard thing for us to kind of wrap our minds around here. Because if we look at the world and we look at what's happening in the world, it's a dark place. It's a hard place. When we look at salt, what is the purpose of salt? When we look at light, what is the purpose of light? Let's just look in our context right now. I'm from Dallas right now. I've been in Dallas for about a year. Dallas is hot, right? Dallas is a hot, I've never lived in Texas. Don't call me a Texan. I'm not a Texan. I'm a Mississippian, born, bred, raised in Mississippi. Haven't lived in Mississippi for about 10, almost 11 years now, but I'm still a Mississippian. You know, Mississippian has the highest education rate in the state, right? In the states, right? You know, we're smart people. You know, we're great. Laughter there. But it's a great place to grow up. But Texas is interesting. Now, one of the things about being in Texas this year, and especially this summer, was we dealt with the shootings that happened in Dallas this past summer, right? And when we look at the shootings that happened in Dallas, the shootings that happen and all across the country, it really brings out some part of our lives. You know, we can watch the nightly news, and and many of you guys who fought in the wars, we can see that that's happening over there, right? We can see it, but it's there. We can see the evil, and we can see the pain, and we can see the suffering, but it's something that's there. It's something that's on our TVs. It's something that we can watch, and then at the end of the night, when the news is over, we hit the button and the screen goes black, and we go back to our beds, and it's just over. But when it invades our personal lives, whether it's our neighborhoods, our friends, it's different. When it comes into our neighborhoods, when our neighbors are getting impacted by the evil and the pain and the suffering, it's something different. When it's no longer on the nightly news, but it's our friends are talking about how they're impacted by suffering. When it's our kids being impacted. When we open up the Daily Sentinel and we see that a kid is shooting another kid in the back just by playing. That's something that impacts us on a different level, because that's not the nightly news. That's something that's happening right here in our city. When we read about things that are happening down the block here, just right here, it's not something that we can just turn off, because it's something that impacts our neighborhood and our community. And how does that relate to us as being followers of Jesus? How does that relate to us being in the world and being followers of Christ? The state of the decay reminds us, or should remind us most of the gospel. The gospel of the kingdom that Jesus taught about in Matthew 4 and in Matthew 5, it should remind us most about what Jesus is saying. The message of the Sermon on the Mount is not a message of distant hope. That's what we have to remember, but rather a message of hope that has arrived. This morning, as we look at this passage, we should find great peace, and knowing that the gospel of the kingdom is of a kingdom that has arrived. Remember, all of the Old Testament, the Israelites are looking for the king to come. They're looking for the Messiah to arrive. And the message of Jesus is, I'm here. The kingdom has come. The hope is present. I'm here. And the message of Matthew 28, when he says, go therefore into all the nations and teach them all that I've commanded you and make disciples of these people. And his last words are what? I am with you always, even until the end of the age. So the message of the kingdom is here, and the king is with us. So the message of the gospel is, even in this state of decay and whatever we find ourselves is the king is here, the king is present, he is part of our lives. We can take great boldness and confidence in knowing what is going on. One of my sayings that I say a lot, and if you get to know me, you'll probably hear it over and over again. You'll probably say, okay, you can find another catchphrase, is that what's really the point of investing more and more and more in this world when everything's just going to burn up, right? Everything around us is just going to burn in the end. If we really believe the gospel and we really focus our lives on the King, then everything in this world is just going to burn, right? Everything. Christian scientist and Professor Duane Gish, who has a PhD, which is something I won't ever have, says, everywhere we look from the scale of the galaxies down to the scale of the atom, we find a universal, natural tendency of all systems to go from order to disorder, from complexity to simplicity. Thus, the cluster of the galaxies are dispersing, and the galaxies move away from one another. Now let's break this down a little bit more. The rotation of the earth is slowing. The magnetic field of the earth is decaying. Erosion is wearing down the features of the earth. Our bodies wear out and die. We decay into a pile of dust. Our houses, our machines wear out, and finally are abandoned and replaced. Atoms decay into simpler products, and it is even being postulated that subatomic particles such as the proton decay, though ever slowing into energy. Each star, including our own sun, is constantly burning up billions of tons of fuel every second. Every star in the universe, unless God intervenes, will exhaust its fuel and become dark and cold. The universe would then become a cold and dead, and of course all life would have ceased long before that. Now this is Dr. Gish saying all this. Now when we look at it from the biblical spiritual side of this is a no-brainer. I mean, I don't have to know this. It's like, you spend all your time researching that. I mean, it all boils down back to Genesis chapter 3. When it comes back to what happened there, death entered the world through Adam and Eve at the entrance of sin. The nature of man has continued to deteriorate rather quickly. We see that Cain and Abel, where Cain rises up and kills Abel out of jealousy in Genesis 4. And by Genesis 6, God himself says, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth, in Genesis 6, verse 13. And you would think that Noah and his family would have figured it all out on the boat when they were sitting on there with all those animals, that, hey, maybe we should be obedient to God. Maybe we should understand what it means to love and to worship and to not sin. But even after being on the boat for all of those days and all those nights with the smelly animals, they still couldn't follow God's commands, and sin re-entered the world through Noah's family. And the deterioration continued after exiting the ark. So we still live in this. We see it all around us, in our bodies, in our possessions, in nature, in every part of the world that we are in. It wears out, it wears down, to eventually it no longer serves the purpose that it was originally intended to. It's hard to grasp this now, maybe for some of us in this world that we're in, but we weren't created to die. We were created to live forever. 2 weeks ago, this past Friday, and eventually we're going to get to this text because we're not going to be here until 3. At some point, y'all are going to do your business. But at that point, we may be all done. Who knows? But 2 weeks ago, this past Friday, my grandfather died. And he was the stalwart of our family. He was the leader. He was married 63 and a half years to my grandmother. But a complete demonstration of the fallen nature of how our bodies weren't meant to die. When I got to share at his funeral, and even before in July when I got to sit by him as he was under hospice care and bedridden in his home, the common conversation was we had been called home for him over the last 6 years that he dealt with cancer and heart failure and all this kind of stuff. But his body was fighting death to that last moment. Like his body was created to live. Sin is the thing that's taking us out. God gave us grace through death so that we could be with him, but our bodies weren't created to die. So it's this battle that's going on that's killing us off. It's the battle of sin that's taking us out. The cancer is the reaction of sin. It's all this thing going on, but it's this fight that's going on. And even as my grandfather was saying, it's better to be with him because I know where I'm going on. We see the reaction of and the causation of the deterioration of the sin, everything else that's going on in this world, in him, right? This isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't what it was supposed to be like, but we can take hope in knowing that the kingdom is secure. That's the message of the gospel. Even in those last few months when he had to have help, every person that came into his room, he took the opportunity to share the gospel with. And this is where we get to verse 13. He says, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. In the midst of the vileness, in the midst of the deterioration, in the midst of the putrefaction of the world, Jesus presents a distinct purpose for the followers. The nature of the world cannot be denied. The fact that death and deterioration are occurring around us on a moment, second by second basis, we can't ignore that. But Jesus says we have a purpose. We have a purpose for life. We are to be the salt. We are to expel the putrefaction. We are to expel the rot. What does salt do when you put it in a piece of meat? A little bit gory here if you're a vegetarian. Sorry for your bad luck. Okay, I know we're not going to have you later today, so oops. But back when you killed an animal, if you were going to preserve the animal, you had to fill it full of salt so that the decay and stuff would not happen. I mean, it gets hot in Texas, right? I didn't realize that until this year. But can you imagine killing an animal in Texas and 5 minutes later it's pretty much cooked? You know what I'm saying? You got to do something there, or it's just going to be rotten. And so they would pack it full of salt to expel the decay and the rot. And in Jesus' illustration, which is extremely real life here, he says, you are the salt of the earth. So how does that relate to us? He says, you are the salt. You are to go and to be part of this world that expels the decay. When you enter a room, when you enter this world, decay doesn't just coexist with you. It can't exist with you because you expel it out. You kill the rot. It cannot be in the same presence with you. That's not a possibility there. There's something that changed. There is a scientific change that happens there. Putrefaction and Christianity and followers of Jesus cannot coexist with decay. There's a life change that happens just by their presence being together. The gospel emanates off true followers of Jesus, right? That happens. That has to happen. That's what Jesus is saying. This means we go forward. We move into the world. We see the illustration going on. They would go into the world. They would break down. That's what the whole message of Jesus was in the book of Acts. Jesus says, those who have been approved by God, this is your mission, to enter the world, to latch onto the bacteria, to find the spots that are decaying, to find the rot, and to stop it, to preserve the world. It's going to be messy, and it's going to be hard, and it's not going to mean that you're going to be the most popular person in the world. But it's going to be a good mission. Why? Because the King has come. And what were his last message? I am with you until the end. So we don't do it by ourselves or by our own power, but because he is with us. Now, Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. Remember, you are an imperative, the salt of the earth. There's no loophole to the mission here. We don't get to say, well, I'm in retirement now, so I don't have to do that anymore, or I'm too young, I'm just learning this thing, so I'm out of this. You are, if you are a follower, if Jesus has redeemed you, if you are a disciple of Christ, you are the salt of the earth. It's not put aside for clergy or leaders or people who are paid by the church or people who are Sunday school leaders or deacons or whomever else we would say. He says, if you are following me, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of your job, your home, your neighborhood, your friends, the world. You are the salt of the earth. If we have been truly transformed, a heart transformation, this will make us want that, desire that, to see the change in those around us. Now, perhaps this is the catch-22 here. Again, I'm from Mississippi, so this is just kind of natural for me. It says, you are the salt of the earth. Besides just expelling rot, what does salt do? It makes things taste good. You have the joy of Christ in you. You have the joy of him living in you. So when you enter the world, you should be able to have that coming out of you. For not only will our lives expel decay, but it's not only about just negative things. For being salt is also a positive, because being salt also means that we should add flavor to the world. Christians adding flavor. That's what Christ has called us to do. When we think of it in a very practical way, the life without Christ is the one that seeks self-gratification, satisfaction in any way possible, whether it be sex, drugs, thrills, spending money, or one of the hundreds of other ways we would try to make ourselves happy. Salt is not just something to expel decay, but something that brings a good taste. Think about the litany of sins in this world. Whether it be gorging ourselves with food, or drugs, or homosexuality, or any other of the litany that we could come up with. They're all about making ourselves feel better, but the life inundated with Jesus is the ultimate life of joy. Christians should be the flavor in the world. We are to have joy. When Christ transforms our lives, we find the greatest joys, the greatest happiness, the greatest fulfillment, because we're not trying to prove ourselves to the world, trying to prove ourselves to our friends, trying to prove ourselves to those around us, but we find it in him. The measuring stick is no longer, well, how do I compare to this person? How do I compare to this person, or to the HOA, or to this, or to that, or to the apartment people living next to us? It's how is my relationship with God doing? And that's what it's about. Jesus made people thirsty for God. Whenever anyone encountered Jesus, whether the Pharisee like Nicodemus or an outcast like Mary Magdalene, that person became thirsty for God. Or are we salty enough to make people thirsty for God? That should be our question. Because we have the greatest reason for excitement. Because we have nothing to fear. Because come the most extreme reasons, we are the most secure. Moving on to verse 14, Jesus says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory, not to yourself, but to your Father who is in heaven. The mission does not just stop with being salt, for in being salt, we are just penetrating the decay. Just in our very existence, the mission continues almost in an offensive fashion. Jesus says, you are the light of the world. When we look back at salt and the meat, the salt merely being placed in the meat expels the decay. But light shines into the darkness. Light shines into the places where there is no light. When we look at the world, when we look at our world, we cannot deny the darkness. In the Gospel of John, John puts out the state of the world in John 3, verses 19 to 20. He says, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people have loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works are evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest their work shall be exposed. So here Jesus says the followers, those who are approved of by God, those who are true followers of Christ, now you are, imperative, the light of the world. This is your mission. This is your mission, to go into and to shine the light where there is no light. Rather, the light is hated. To shine the light that is within us, Not the light that we manifest ourselves, not the light that we make, but the light that Christ has put in us. Again, this is not a self-made faith. We don't make the salt. The salt is in us because of who Christ is in us. The light is not in us because of we turned on a switch, we manifested the batteries or nothing, but the light is coming out of us because of what Christ is doing through us, right? This is not a self-made religion. This is not a religion. This is not something that we read a book, we decided we could do this ourselves, but this is God emanating himself through us, right? So this is coming out. So this is the light coming. And so we're going into these dark places and shining the light of Christ through us. This is what he is saying. You are the light of the world. This is your mission, to go and to shine the light where it's hated, to shine the light that is within us because of this transformation, to carry this mission forward. The significance of this goes directly back to Christ himself. In John 8, John goes on to say, and Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In Exodus 13, 21 to 22, we see the direct reference back to the importance of light. And it says, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they may travel by day and by night, and the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. They did not depart from these people. It is in this same reference that Christ is saying, when you follow me, you will not walk in darkness, just as when the people of Israel were obedient to God. God provided for, took care of, and met the needs of the people. This is what it means to follow and to be the light. It was when the Israelite nation rejected God that they faced turmoil, pain, and suffering, which we can read about all throughout the Judges and pretty much the rest of the Old Testament. The light has a distinct purpose: to show the way to God, to lead people back to God, to illuminate the darkness, to show hope, to be the guide in the darkness. It is the illumination in the midst of the curse. It is the kingdom that has come now while we wait for the consummation of the kingdom of heaven that we all long for, right? Martin Lloyd Jones, who I showed you guys on my list of authors, who's one of my favorites, says it this way. He says, the result of his coming will be this: my Father and I will take up our abode in you. We will be in you, and you will be in us. God, who is the Father of lights, is the light that is in us. He is in us, and we are in him. And thus it can be said of the Christian, you are the light of the world. Why? Because my Father and I take up our abode in you. So, our mission is now to be the light of the world, to expose the darkness. As Paul says in Ephesians 5:8, to live as children of the light, for we are no longer children of the darkness. It means that we can't just be comfortable with being confined to this building, to just being in our Sunday school classes or our small groups or our coffee groups or whatever they should be, but our level of comfortability can't just stop there. But we have to continue pushing out. We have to keep pushing out. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it on a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others. What is the purpose of a church? What is the purpose of followers of Christ? It's good to gather. Gathering is important. Gathering is biblical because God has called us here for the edification of the word, for the studying of the word, for the edification of each other, and for the going out. But we can't forsake the going out. Because if we just gather and the word never goes out and the light never penetrates the darkness, the salt never penetrates the decaying part of the world, then we're just one light in one place on one block that never impacts the community, that never impacts what's right here in Grand Junction. People ask in the marathon of meetings we had yesterday and whatever else has gone on in the last 48, 70, however long I've been here. Your guess is as good as mine at this point. Why this church? Why this city? And all the questions. This is not a politically correct answer, and this is not I'm not seeking a job. Let's just put it to you directly. I got your attention with that one. The reason why. This valley has a confluence of about 187,000 people if you really draw the line somewhere out there. About 61% of those people claim to have no religious affiliation at all, if you're very conservative with the number. In this city, within 4 blocks of this church, there are 30 nations and 48 states represented. 30 nations and 48 different states. There's a great need for the gospel that goes beyond a job, that goes beyond any of the underlying conversations that have happened. Jesus has called us to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. That's why. That's the only answer. Because there is a need for the message of the kingdom to go forward. And when you look at a church that has had an impact on a community for 60 plus years, it demonstrates a church that loves the gospel, that cares about the people, and that is willing to invest for the long haul. Now, if I've missed the boat somewhere, so be it. But all along the way, we all need the prodding to be reminded that we have hope. That Jesus is with us always, even until the end of the age, no matter what state our bodies are in, because we're all deteriorating at some point. We're all in this point of deterioration. I watched my grandfather die as I would go home time and time again. We all are in that state at some point or another. 100% of us are going to die. I mean, life-changing stat right there, I know. I'm from Mississippi, remember? It's the small things. But we're all headed that direction. The question is what we're going to do between today and that day. Because we all run into these elements between here and there. Between the elements of darkness and decay. And the reality of pain and suffering that we see on the news are now in our neighborhoods and now in our communities. And we should not be surprised by those. But rather it should be the thing that reminds us of the need for the gospel in every part of our lives. That should be the only thing that it does to our psyche or to our mindset. It should not blow our minds. It should rather be the kicking off point for it's another day that needs the gospel to go out for another day. That's the point. Christ did not come so that darkness would be darker, but rather so that light would be known. How many atheists would you say that Christ was evil in his coming so that he would just show us that there was more evil? He was just a great moral person, and he just demonstrated the evilness that was in us already. Likewise, our lives are not to condemn darkness, but rather to bring the gospel into darkness. Dr. Tim Keller in New York says, when Jesus Christ says, "You are the salt and light of the world," this is what he is saying a Christian should be like. Number one, salt and light expose decay and darkness. If you are light, that means your life should be so beautiful that when it comes into contact with other parts of the environment, the beauty of your life shows up other things for what they really are. Right? The beauty of your life shows up other things for what they really are. For example, if you are a Christian, then just by your very presence, you show up and you reveal the dishonesty in business. You reveal the gossip in the office. You reveal the racism in your neighborhood. You reveal the corruption in your political ward. You reveal the promiscuity in your party. You simply, by being a Christian, do these things. You walk on in and it immediately makes the racism look like racism. It makes the promiscuity look like what it is. It makes the gossip look like gossip. And it makes the corruption look like corruption just by you saying, "I am going to live according to the truth," which is the 10 Commandments to the beauty of Christ. How are we going to live? In the workplaces, in the apartment complexes, in the living places, in the homes, in the neighborhoods, in the schools that are represented here, how are we going to live? Because Sunday worship shouldn't stop at 12:30 when lunch is over and the nap kicks in and the pro football gets going, and for me, golf, it shouldn't stop there. But it's a transformative experience that is just renewed on Sunday and travels all throughout your week. How are we going to live? Let's pray this morning. God, we thank you for this time that more than anything else we can gather and hear your word. We thank you for the faithfulness that you have in giving us your word, that you gave us the ability to be here, to know you, to worship you. And God, this morning as we close this time of worship, we pray that more than anything else you are glorified and that you are honored. God, we pray that the neighborhoods and the workplaces of this community are impacted because of this church this week and this year. God, I pray if there's somebody in this room that doesn't know you right now, that your Spirit would begin working on them right now and transforming their lives, and they would not be able to leave this building today without understanding and seeing you. In your name I pray. Amen.